Hey guys, this is Corey from Redefining Strength. Welcome to the Fitness Hacks Podcast. This is a show where I share all my free workout and nutrition tips. I'm not going to ever fill this episode with sponsorships or ask you to buy anything. All I ask in return is if you're enjoying the podcast to leave a review or leave a 5-star rating. Or even better, share it with someone you think it might help. This will only take a few minutes and would mean the world to me and possibly change the life of someone you know. So let's jump right in. We can define how we age. I am a big believer in not letting that number, our trips around the sun, define what we can and cannot do. But we also need to address that as we get older, our body needs and goals change, even if it's purely because our lifestyle has evolved over the years. And a lot of times when we go to addressing these changes, we think, let's adjust our workouts, let's adjust our macros. But our micros can have a huge impact on how our body is functioning, on the energy levels that we have, how we're conquering our day, how we're conquering our workout session, which is why I'm super excited to be joined by Michelle today to dive into those micros and how they can really help you define how you age. So Michelle, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So a big micro we want to focus on is magnesium. And I think it's funny how much you nerd out about this, and it makes my nerd heart happy. So I'd love to go straight into magnesium and the impact it can really have and all the nuance to this micronutrient.
Yeah, so magnesium is in over 300 enzymatic reactions that your body actually does. So it can help from anything from muscle cramps to stress, anxiety, sleep, constipation, and hundreds of others, right? But those are kind of the big things that people like to focus on. And those are the biggest complaints people have as they age, is actually their stress increases, anxiety increases. They may all of a sudden notice that they're more sore after workouts and are dealing more with more muscle cramps. And all of a sudden sleep is being affected from the cramps, or just in general, they're having sleep difficulties. And magnesium is one of the very first things I want to look at for them, because as we age, our need for it does actually increase. So it is something that we do want to pay a little bit more attention to.
And it's so important that we realize how interconnected everything is. I love that you brought up like cramps and not sleeping, because a lot of times we won't think, oh, well, I'm not sleeping because of this. And so the more we start to see how everything is so connected and then boil it down to, well, what's one small change I can make that can impact multiple different things at once, the better off we're going to be. But it's not as simple as just get more magnesium. I know there are a lot of different variations that we might want to focus on. And I think when we oversimplify or overcomplicate, we get into a lot of trouble. So the more we can learn about the nuance and really the variations that can help us, the more we can make sure that we're getting exactly what we need over just throwing a whole bunch of spaghetti at the wall, hoping something sticks. So can you talk a little bit more about the different types of magnesium and how to really determine what we might need?
Yeah, and I'm just going to remind everyone, we did post kind of a magnesium quiz that will actually kind of lead you to a type that may be more beneficial for you. So if you haven't taken that, go ahead and take it, because it will also kind of help guide you. But the main ones we're going to focus on, and there is quite a few, but the top 3 are going to be magnesium glycinate or biglycinate. You may see either one kind of on the shelf, but that's really going to help your sleep. It's going to help improve a variety of inflammatory conditions, including the heart. So this is one, like if you are someone that may have some heart health-related issues or a family history of heart-related diseases, that may be something that you want to actually pay a little bit more attention to. It's easily absorbed, and it does help with anxiety, depression, stress, and even insomnia. So that's going to be kind of the first one to kind of look at. The next one I do want to cover is magnesium malate. So again, it's going to be well absorbed in the digestive tract. It is a great option for, of course, replenishing your overall magnesium levels. But this one's a little bit more gentle on the system, and it does have less of a laxative effect. So if you're someone that isn't really suffering from constipation, because I will say, if you incorporate magnesium, almost every single type of magnesium is going to help your bowel movements. So if that's not a big concern, this may be kind of the type that you want to lean more towards, because it isn't going to have as big as a laxative effect as the other types. The last one I'm gonna bring up is, and I'm always gonna say it, I'm probably gonna say it wrong, so bear with me, but magnesium L-threonate. And this form, again, easily absorbed. It's often used because of its brain benefits. So if you are someone that is really suffering from high anxiety, depression, or even if you have a history or family history of dementia, Alzheimer's, any age-related memory loss, this is going to be one that's going to actually benefit you. And all of them are going to benefit the other areas as well. These ones just tend to be better absorbed and are better for either the brain or the heart, or just may have a little bit of that less laxative effect.
It's really interesting hearing about all the different like purposes and benefits of the different types of magnesium, because I think a lot of times too, when we just use like an overarching one, we might be like, oh, well, this really isn't paying off. And then ultimately stop doing something that really could benefit us just because we didn't select the right type. And even going off of that a little bit, you brought up like we need more as we get older. And I think that's something we don't often recognize. We think, oh, I'm not deficient in it. Not, hey, my needs have actually increased for X, Y, and Z reasons, and be it aging or be it even hormone changes. I know, especially during menopause, you often recommend magnesium. Can you talk a little bit more about why it can be really helpful during menopause to help us manage those symptoms?
Yeah, so you are going to experience lots of changes that are just going to happen. You have no control over it because when your body changes, hormones are going to change during menopause. And a lot of times, this is actually going to affect your muscle function, and it actually includes muscle tension cramps. So this is why I focus a lot on muscle cramps, muscle soreness, and kind of sleep, because a lot of people recognize they kind of maybe have a little bit of restless leg syndrome when they're trying to go to sleep, or they start to feel things cramp when they're going to sleep. And that actually is their hormones actually are playing a part into that. Another part of that is you simply require more water when you are in menopause as well, which also can lead to increased muscle tension when you're working out. Again, I'm going to say, if you haven't, even go back to the comment sections on the post that we did on Monday, because I was loving seeing people, even what they were commenting, because someone had made a comment of, I started taking magnesium and I didn't even recognize it. But now that you're saying it, I'm looking back and I am feeling less sore after I do my workouts. So sometimes you may, like you had mentioned, sometimes you may not even notice, but once you kind of start connecting the dots, you're going to see that this actually plays effect in multiple ways. And one of the biggest things that I think magnesium does not get enough credit for, because it's harder to recognize, is anxiety and depression. When you hit menopause, your hormones do actually affect your anxiety levels and your depression. So when you take magnesium, that can actually be a huge benefit to it. And I don't think that gets talked enough about people who are going through menopause, is kind of the mental health side of it. And one of the biggest things that I love about this is, if you've ever been someone that has dealt with depression, and I sometimes compare postpartum depression to like perimenopause and menopause, because the hormones are kind of similar, and your reaction is similar. But when you are dealing with that, you do not recognize how low you are in the moment. It's only after you kind of start coming out of that fog that you kind of look back and you're like, oh, yeah, I was. So if you were in that stage, you may not even realize right now that that would benefit me. But it may be something that if you connect the dots and you think about and kind of reflect, you'll find that the magnesium actually is allowing you to have a more calming effect in your day, help you reduce some of that stress, and even calm some of that nervous system for you.
I also think so often these days we talk about different things like hormone health or mental health, even as being slightly out of our control and something we just have to manage or accept, instead of really diving into our lifestyles and seeing all the things we can do to make improvements in our mental functioning and faculties and in our hormone balance and health. And so instead of just saying, oh, well, this is the way it is, this has to impact everything else, say, okay, well, this does impact everything else and I want to navigate around it and own it. But what else can I adjust to see better improvements? Because by focusing on magnesium, by really dialing in your micros, you're going to improve your health. And then if it has these other payoffs, all the better. And you don't even realize how much that snowball can really impact so many other areas that you weren't even trying to impact. And that's why diving into the nuance, and while this can feel like it's overcomplicating things because there's so many details, it can really help you get to the one thing you need and know that there are opportunities and options out there. So moving on from magnesium, next micro you want people to pay attention to really help us define how we're aging and age so that we feel our most fabulous to our final day on this planet. Because I'm sorry, I'm never going to accept that I can't control enough to keep moving and feeling my best. So next micro.
I really want to kind of cover selenium. And this one doesn't necessarily increase with age, but it has a pretty powerful effect. And I just don't think it gets the recognition that it actually deserves. And one thing that I think is huge is a lot of times what I hear when people are aging is, and how it would actually increase the needs, is a lot of times people just find through age that their thyroid activity levels change. So whether you are recognizing that you have low T levels, selenium actually helps increase your thyroid activity. So just ensuring that you're taking adequate amounts is going to make a big difference. And it does also not just help with your thyroid health, but it's going to help with your antioxidant defense, your immune function, and even potentially your cognitive health. So again, it's also going to kind of help that brain health. And I think that's so huge. And I am going to give a little warning, because I know when people hear magnesium, when people hear me kind of going off on a particular mineral, oftentimes the response is, well, I'm just going to eat a ton. Like, I'm going to get tons of it. So especially with selenium, I'm going to say with the caveat, like, there's always going to be such a thing as too much. And selenium is one of those, which I think is why it doesn't get recognized as often, because it can be overdone and you can have some negative effects if you overdo it. But this is really, again, why I think it's so crucial to make sure you're getting adequate amounts, even though this is it's an essential trace mineral, but it is critical and has critical roles in various bodily functions.
And going off of that on thyroid health and getting older, we often don't realize, and I always take it back to the lifestyle, all the different factors that can really accumulate and have an impact where, as we're going through menopause, we might have heard that lower carb is really key to helping us, navigate some insulin resistance we might be seeing. It might be more beneficial for fat loss during that time. But on the flip side, if we cut our carbs too low, that can have an impact on thyroid health as well. So you want to make sure that you're really tracking what you're doing as you're making changes to make the most accurate ones. And I know it can feel a little overwhelming to start. I know it can feel a little tedious, but the more you're tracking these things, the more you can make sure that you're making changes that actually meet you where you're at, whether you're adjusting those micros or even paying attention again to those macros and the impact they're having. But don't just write yourself off or say, this is something I can't control or change. See all the different ways you can really adjust your lifestyle to move and feel your best. And going off of that, if someone was like, oh no, what if I'm getting too much? How would I know? What are some of the negative side effects they might see, just so they can be aware?
So there's going to be big things like hair loss, a lot of gastrointestinal distress. Those are going to be probably the two biggest signs. But a lot of it is you're just going to kind of feel crummy overall. But if you're starting to notice hair loss and you're getting enough protein, you're getting enough of the other essential nutrients and calories, you may want to look at selenium, because that's going to be kind of a tell sign that you may be overdoing it. And this is something I do recommend for a lot of people who, again, are in the menopausal age or have low T levels. I've actually had people be able to up their selenium and actually lower their thyroid medication. And one of the best sources of selenium is actually going to be Brazil nuts. But because it is so rich, this isn't you all of a sudden sitting down and having half a cup to 2 cups of selenium Brazil nuts. This is really, there's enough in about 1 or 2 Brazil nuts that you are more than covered for your daily needs. So if that's something that you can incorporate, it's one of those things like you can eat it as a healthy fat and you're going to get your selenium. And I love so much that you brought up how your diet can actually play a huge role in your micronutrients, because it is something that as you are adjusting your intake, oftentimes selenium is one that kind of does get decreased. So I think that is so huge to know that you can get it from a food source like Brazil nuts, but often I've had lots of people that also are just like, I really just don't like Brazil nuts. Like, that's not going to be something you ever see me snacking on. And that's okay too, because of course, you can always supplement with it as well.
And off of that, when someone's adjusting their diet to make sure they're really getting enough, we often talk about eating the rainbow. But I know that a lot of times too, it's focusing on those macro portions. So even paying attention to how you're hitting your protein sources. So not just getting more fruits and vegetables, but even diversity in some of those other things that can be very helpful as well, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Seafood and meat and poultry, those are also going to have selenium in them. And I know we've talked about this before in past, even podcasts and videos, but protein is full of micronutrients. And you're not just sitting down and just getting amino acids from your protein. You are getting lots of micronutrients as well.
And now moving on to another micro. We've talked about this a little bit more recently because it hasn't gotten the love that it really deserves, I think, in terms of bone health. And bone health is something we need to pay attention to as we get older. I'm sorry. I want to avoid falls and fractures, and I think almost everybody else does too. We want to move our best. We want to be strong. We don't want to be out with aches and pains and injuries. So taking care of our bone health to stay our most fabulous is really key. We talk about calcium, we talk about vitamin D, but vitamin K is also really important. Can you talk a little bit about like what it really does, why it's so important, and how it contributes?
Yeah, so vitamin K is a protein that's going to be actually involved in the bone mineralization. So it actually is essential for that protein to come in and actually be able to mineralize your bones and make them stronger. So as you mentioned, we are at a huge increased risk for osteoporosis as we age. And one of the things too that I think it's kind of overlooked, and we were talking about how diet changes and that changes kind of what your intake is. But one of the things that is very common is that as women go through menopause, they actually find they can become a little bit lactose intolerant or lactose sensitive. So all of a sudden their dairy actually decreases. And we know you can consume calcium and vitamin D and those things from other sources, but your intake does kind of go down. And this is really where it's even more important to kind of pay attention to vitamin K, because you kind of want to capitalize and make the most out of what you are consuming. And vitamin K is actually really going to be useful in actually making sure that the calcium and vitamin D is being brought in to your bones to actually make them stronger and harder. And another thing with vitamin K is it actually is very important for your cardiovascular health. Estrogen, I know we've mentioned this before in the past, but estrogen is heart protective. You actually are at lower risk for heart-related diseases prior to menopause. Now, once you hit menopause, your risk actually becomes the same as men. So up till that point, our risk is at a lot lower than men. And then once we hit menopause, all of a sudden it's equaled out. So we do want to make sure that we are also paying attention for vitamin K because it's going to help prevent the calcification of arteries and other soft tissues that can lead to cardiovascular diseases.
And off of this, like we talk about how much, our body does change with age and like hormone changes have an impact. We also have to consider previous dieting practices when we're talking about some of these nutritional gaps that we might need to address. Because a lot of times in trying to diet down and achieve a specific aesthetic goal or in training for different things, our fueling might not have been our focus in terms of our health. We often have like, okay, I just need to eat enough to get through this race or this training session, or I need to eat, to lose weight. And so our focus isn't on these micronutrients or even the types of foods that we're restricting. And so because of those previous dieting practices, sometimes we've created elimination of foods that are really key to helping us address those nutritional gaps as we get older. So as you mentioned, if you've ever feared dairy for weight loss, because I know that was something that became a topic in the bodybuilding realms where it was like, oh, would this cause inflammation and not allow you to lose that belly fat? So if you've ever feared something, you need to address how it can fit into your diet and why you actually feared it, because a lot of times that might not be serving you well when addressing the nutritional needs as you get older. So just also note, it's not just your age, it's not just hormone changes, it's all the previous dieting practices that we've even done that can now have an impact on what we need and the changes we need to make to meet our body where it's at now. So talking about, anything else on vitamin K or any other micronutrients that you really think are key that people need to pay attention to as they get older, and even how that might impact how they go about achieving an aesthetic goal with the changes they're seeing so they don't fall back into old patterns.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, like I mentioned, is really capitalizing on what you are intaking. Because you brought up some key points. So often have I seen people that are looking to diet down or slim down, they immediately go to the elimination. And what's really hard with that is you are going to all of a sudden be losing out of a whole food source that was going to be high in certain things. So it is going to make sure that you are capitalizing on your intake, and also making sure that you are addressing what it actually is, that what those nutrients are that you are kind of eliminating, if you do choose to do that route. Because there are other ways, to get calcium, vitamin D besides dairy. It's going to be harder, but there are other ways. So that's really where you want to pay attention to those green leafy vegetables that are going to be rich sources. But another thing to kind of make sure is, if you are going to be doing that, you need to make sure you're supplementing, and supplementing smart. And that was something I wanted to kind of cover too, is the mistakes I often see when people are actually going towards supplementing. And that is really going to be over supplementation. Like, I know I already brought it up, I already kind of talked about this earlier on, but so often I will see women be like, okay, I'm taking my women's health multi, I'm taking this bone health that's going to have, and most of the time that's going to have calcium, vitamin K, vitamin D, and some other nutrients in it. And then they may hear something was good for hair, so they're going to take that hair, skin, and nail one, and they heard this was good for skin, so they're going to be taking this skin specific supplement. Well, all of a sudden you now are taking tons of pills, but you're also probably over consuming certain nutrients and vitamins, because this supplement probably has some of that. That woman's health multi probably has calcium and vitamin K and vitamin D. That bone health is going to have the same thing. And you're going to get similar things in that hair, skin, and nail stuff. So all of a sudden we kind of have this cross where people are really overdoing certain nutrients. And as I mentioned, there's a balance. You got to have that balance. So we want to make sure we're not deficient, but we also want to make sure that we are not hitting toxic levels either. And sometimes that toxic levels is going to actually interfere with the absorption of other vitamins and minerals. So you may be supplementing, and all of a sudden you're still deficient in some of the things you're supplementing with because things are blocking them. There is a science to supplementing.
And it's super interesting, like this whole thing of like, it's systems working together. We constantly add more and think more is better. If I just throw all of this at it, something's got to work because I'm covering everything. But in trying to cover everything, you're not necessarily addressing the one thing you need. For some reason, the visual comes to mind of like, you have this machine that, cranks out products perfectly. It's, turning out new toys and it's working really, really well. And you think, well, if it's working really well and there could be this one little thing that maybe I make better, but now I'm going to add on 15 other things. You wouldn't do that, right? You wouldn't add on 15 things you didn't need just because those were really good pieces too. If it was working pretty well, you'd go in and maybe oil the one thing that isn't working as perfectly. You'd be very like nuanced and specific in how you're adjusting the systems versus just throwing everything on there. Because in adding all these cogs and wheels and pieces, you could end up making it not work. And I know that's a slightly strange visual, but that's what my brain always comes back to. And that's how we approach our nutrition. It's how we approach our workouts. We think, I'm just going to throw on more good things. And in theory, that should work. And it's like, it doesn't really work that way. Often that just busts the system so that it's not working as well as it should. So really diving into the nuance of some of these things through how you're tracking, how you're adjusting, making 1% changes is super key. And it can be very simple. It doesn't have to be overly complicated. You don't go to all these different things. You say, hey, what are the symptoms I'm having that I need to address? Or what are the problems that I think are the most important? And then go to something that covers more of those at once and say, hey, I'm going to try this one thing first. Just try magnesium. I'm just going to make this one adjustment right here and then see where that goes. And in making that change, even if you are including a supplement for something, maybe you say, hey, I'm going to diversify the foods I'm eating because I want to get more leafy greens. But instead of complicating that, say, hey, I'm going to just put like a different thing at lunch and dinner. And already I'm getting 2 different things in the course of the day. It doesn't have to be 50 different things, right? So it's like the more we can really be specific in how we're addressing problems and changes, the better off we're going to be.
Yeah. And I love what you said. Like, it is a hierarchy. Your body has a hierarchy of needs, and you need to be approaching that with how you're supplementing. Because as you mentioned, you may be starting up here, and yeah, there may be tons of things that could help, but is magnesium possibly going to cover multiple of those things for you? Yeah, probably. So you can probably cover lots of areas with one thing. So it's really making sure that you are kind of going about it really smart and you got to do your research. You have to be paying attention, and it can't just be, oh, well, I heard this was good, so I'm going to start taking it. And I think one of my biggest kind of struggles as a dietitian is when I have someone and they are just taking so many pills, just tons of pills, because pills are why I'm all for supplementation. And yes, it's needed. Yes, it's there. I supplement. When you are taking tons and tons of pills, that is going to be hard on your gastrointestinal tract. Like it is. It's your body absorbs things at certain spots. And when you are cram packing a bunch of things all at once, your body is going to try and process that and have to break it down. And it's not always easy, which is often why, like, I know I'll tell someone what the RDA level is, and they're going to be like, oh, well, my pill is this high in it. Yeah, your pill's that high in it because the chances that you're actually going to absorb all of it isn't that high. So you may be coming in thinking, well, there's no way I'm deficient in this because I have 100% of this supplement. The chances are that you're actually not absorbing it, especially if you are taking multiple pills at once. That, like I said, I know I said this earlier, but it will counter interact with other ingredients that can make it so you're not absorbing things as well or as easily as you should.
And while we want to simplify things as much as possible, being aware of the impact other things you're consuming with the different supplements, with even specific foods, can be very important to help you make sure that you're getting the most out of the micros that you are consuming. So off of that, there are a couple questions that I wanted to touch on because I think that they will lead to some interesting discussion and also answer some questions for other people. It says recommendation on selenium dose first off, and then also does vitamin K need fat to be absorbed? Michelle, I will hand it off to you.
So to start with, you said it was selenium you were asking, right, for the RDA?
Or just recommended dose.
Okay. So with selenium, the RDA for that is typically about 55 micrograms. But you can go, that doesn't mean that's all you take, right? There's a higher level. So typically the recommended amount of actually dosing it is going to be around 200 mcgs or micrograms for it.
And then vitamin K, and best to take with fat to absorb it.
Yes, so it is a fat soluble vitamin. So you do want to make sure that you're consuming some fat when you're doing it. And so I know vitamin K is often found in green leafy greens. So if you're thinking about either sauteing it or, the kale with a little bit of olive oil, or even just making sure that you are consuming things with a vinaigrette that's going to have a little bit of that oil is going to make it more easily absorbed for you.
And even with noting the best way of taking these different things, remember, guys, it's also about making something sustainable. So while we want to pay attention to these things to get the 1% improvements, do not stress yourself out too. Our body is really good at trying to use what we give it. Just remember that. While we want to pay attention to the nuance, while we want to do what we can to make those 1% improvements, you also want to make sure that you're doing something you can do consistently, because that will pay off as well. Michelle, in terms of that, is there anything people should really worry about with taking some of these supplements or these micros that you mentioned today, and in terms of timing for like best practices?
Yeah, so the big thing is I often recommend magnesium to take at night. And I say this just because it is, like I said, it is going to help with bowel movements. So oftentimes you're going to set yourself up so in the morning you're going to have that and be able to go about your day. And some people do find magnesium to be sometimes a little bit harder on the stomach. Like I said, there are lots of different types. So don't take one and just think, oh, I can't do magnesium, it makes me sick. Because there are going to be some that are going to be more gentle. But that would be my biggest thing for magnesium, is to actually take it at night. For selenium, that is something that I really like to encourage people, if they can, to take it kind of in the nut form. So I typically just recommend that as kind of being like a midday, part of your midday snack. Again, it doesn't have to be that time. That's just typically what I tend to recommend for people, because it tends just to sit better. And then vitamin K is one that you can really kind of take that one fairly pretty much is pretty open to any time of the day. But as long as you mentioned, most of the time you're going to be consuming it with a fat source, just because a lot of the times that's how we consume those vegetables, anyways. So that's not something that you necessarily need to worry about so much. So vitamin K is kind of fair game. Magnesium, I'd recommend more at night.
I guess you could technically make a salad with your leafy greens and put some Brazil nuts on there. Although
There,
I think if people really don't like those Brazil nuts, would you ever recommend someone eat something just because it has something? I'm guessing the answer is no, because usually we try and say, hey, you're not going to keep doing it if you really don't like doing it. So find a different source of that micro. But, I don't know your thoughts on that. Still so easy. Maybe you do it, but I don't know.
this is kind of my I mean I have a little different view on this one. I will be honest, because quite frankly, Brazil nuts, like that's not the nut that I'm going to be like, ooh, yes, I can't wait to snack on my Brazil nuts. But I do look at it like, I kind of look at it as I'm taking medicine, and I'm taking two. Brazil nuts, like, it's really one of those, like, if you can tolerate it, and if it's something that you can be like, you know what, I'm just going to treat it like I'm taking my medicine, great, do that. It's going to be cheaper. So that is something that would be the one time that I'd maybe say, look at it like you're just kind of taking your medicine. And if you can do it and you can tolerate it, great. But I will say with the caveat exactly what you said. But if you truly, really hate something, you're not going to stick to it. So that would be when I would say, yeah, let's look at a supplement.
I would find a way to work it into something where then couldn't taste it if I didn't like it. That's my thing. How can you bury it? Although Ryan's like shaking his head at me because I like putting protein powder in different things because I don't feel like I can then taste it, and I think it enhances the thing. He thinks it just makes anything nasty, so he'll chug it on the side. So I think he would actually agree with you on the Brazil nut things. But I would try and find a way to work it into something if I was going to eat that I wanted. Someone now commented, I'm a little worried that I may be overdoing it with supplementation. If I'm taking a multivitamin for women, is it okay to take a separate magnesium pill? Your thoughts on this, Michelle?
So it can be. I would definitely want to know what level of magnesium your multi is having, because you may find that it's actually already covering you. And I didn't say this, but multis are actually typically something I also tend to recommend to take at night too, because again, you just there's so much going on that sometimes taking it more in the evening is just going to be easier on your GI system. So I know that wasn't a direct answer, but it kind of depends. It could be fine. It could be that the multi you're taking is already pretty high. I will say most multis aren't going to be high enough in magnesium, so you're probably okay. And I'm going to do a little. I'm going to mention though too, we do supplement, like personalized supplementations for RS. So if that is something that you are really curious about and you're worried that you may be over consuming some things, you can actually get on with our dietitian who will go over that and actually present with you what they would actually have you do and kind of give you a multi or a pill that's going to cover all of your needs. Like Corey was talking about the hierarchy of needs. So we'll focus on that for you. And what's kind of cool about it is you are able to kind of adjust things in the future. So if your needs change, because we all know the human body is not stagnant. Oh, that did not come out right. But we all know we're not going to stay the same. So things are going to change. So if things do change, you can actually get reevaluated and meet with the dietitian as well and readjust your supplement. So if that's something you're really you're curious about or concerned about, I would highly, highly recommend to just schedule a call with our dietitian and get on with that.
It also would be based on the type of magnesium you might find that you need extra of, or the symptoms you're addressing versus the type in your multivitamin. Can you maybe speak a little bit, Michelle, to what you generally find in the multivitamin with those things? Because I think that nuance is really key to also recognize, because it might not be the form of magnesium that you need.
Yeah. So one thing I'm going to say with multis, there are some great ones out there, don't get me wrong, but oftentimes when it comes to supplements, a lot of this is marketing, right? They want to say like, oh, we're going to give you 100% of this, 200% of this. And that's not necessarily bad, because you're probably not going to absorb all of it. But the other reason why they're able to do that is oftentimes the bioavailability of the source they're using isn't as high as another source. And usually it's because it's a little bit of a cheaper option. So this is really, again, it's something that you just kind of want to be aware of. And I know, honestly, we could could go off on just kind of bioavailability and what's actually used, what is actually best. Because again, multis are often, they're going to try and say they cover every box, but they're probably not always going to have the best sources for your body to absorb. So that's going to be my one thing with them. I know, like you said, like oftentimes we take it and we're like, okay, I'm covered. I took my multi, but you may not actually be able to absorb all the whole multi that you're taking. So this is really where I look at third-party testing needs to be kind of a big thing. This is where it's more important to actually be able to see if they have like good business practices. But a big thing is going to make sure that they actually are third-party tested.
Thanks for listening to the Fitness Hacks podcast. Again, this is the place where I share all my free workout and nutrition tips. I'm never going to run sponsorships or ask you to buy anything. All I ask in return is if you're enjoying the podcast to leave a rating or review or share it with someone you think it might help. This will only take a few minutes, and it would mean the world to me and possibly change the life of someone you know.